Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Gorin, and I am the Executive Director of the National Association of School Psychologists. It's really my pleasure to welcome you here, those of you in the room, and those of you who are viewing us through Facebook Live. Welcome. This is a very important discussion on how to improve school climate and safety. So we first want to give a special thank you to Congressman Bobby Scott for sponsoring this space and for his leadership in the current school safety conversation, and for his tireless work to advance policies that improve our nation's schools for all children. To be sure, we're delighted to co-sponsor this event with the National Association of Secondary School Principals, NASP, and we just know that they're a long-standing partner in our work to advance effective school safety, our policy, and our practice. Just like our other education partners, who I'll talk about in a second, who have co-authored with us the framework for safe and successful schools that is on your chair. Together, we're deeply committed to ensuring that the voices of education leaders responsible for this work are leading the discussion about what really keeps children safe and focused on their learning. The bottom line is that school safety is a day in and day out endeavor. I hope we can all agree that hardening our schools is not the simple solution. Rather, we should be balancing physical and psychological safety with reasonable security measures and sustained district and building level commitment, because we want to foster welcoming and supporting learning environments day in and day out. We should be helping school leaders find ways to more fully access their school-employed mental health professionals and their teachers. And together, we must be working to foster positive relationships with students and their families. Again, hardening our schools is not the answer. So I'd like to show you this rock. See this rock? It was sent to me by a school psychologist in Pennsylvania. With it came a note that reads, "Genuine Pennsylvania rock for protection against armed intruders." This is the rock. A landscaper donated 5-gallon buckets for every teacher to have in their closet in their classroom in case they can't keep an armed intruder out of their classroom. This is what they use. Other school districts in Pennsylvania are using golf balls and lacrosse balls to throw at armed intruders if they are invading their classroom. These schools do have armed security officers, but the district felt it needed another level of protection. So we need to prevent as well as protect. On your chair, there's a packet with information that includes a framework for safe and successful schools, which, as you can see on the cover, has the work of the National Association of School Principals, secondary school principals, elementary school principals, our association, school resource officers, school counselors, and school social workers. Together, we work to create evidence-based policy and practices that improve comprehensive school safety. We urge you to look at this and use this in your own policy development. Now it's time to introduce our panel and learn from 5 educators who embody this work in schools and districts, day in and day out. 4 of them are here with us today. 1 of them is on a video that you will see in a minute. First, I'd like to introduce Frank Scenari. I was going to say the one in the blue tie, but there are 2 of you. So Frank, just raise your hand for a second. Frank is a school psychologist and the district coordinator for student services and crisis programming in Miami-Dade County. That's in Florida. Frank's a founding member of the National Association of School Psychologists School Crisis Response Team, a group of specially trained school psychologists who provide consultative and crisis response services to schools and communities across the country. For the past 25 years, Frank has provided direct crisis response, as well as training in crisis prevention, preparedness, response, recovery, and at the international and national level. And as an aside, Frank was one of the coordinators of the response of the Parkland school shooting, Parkland, Florida, and he was there for 13 days helping to run the response after that shooting. Michael O'Neill there you go, the other of the time, is a member of the School Committee of Boston Public Schools. Prior to this year, Michael served for 5 terms as chair of the school committee. The Boston School Committee oversees the Boston Public Schools, which educates 57,000 students. And in his role, Michael has helped to advance efforts to improve access to comprehensive school mental health services, yay, and efforts to reduce the school-to-prison pipeline. Thank you. He's also a member of the Executive Committee of the Council of Great City Schools, which is the main governing body of this organization, including the top 70 urban school districts. Thank you for being here. Dr. Melissa Perot is a school psychologist and an associate professor of counseling and school psychology at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Her research focuses on prevention and intervention in school-based mental health services. She's also committed to the opportunities and challenges for provision of mental health services in schools, particularly urban schools. Thank you. Melissa serves on the NASP Ethics and Professional Practices Board, is a former president of the Massachusetts Association of School Psychologists, and is a past recipient of the NASP Outstanding Advocate Award. Dr. Tommy Welch is the principal of the Meadow Creek High School in Norcross, Georgia, and one of Georgia's largest comprehensive high schools. He was this year's Georgia Principal of the Year, 2018, and a finalist for the National Association of Secondary School Principals Principal of the Year. Tommy served at Meadow Creek since 2003, where he began as a teacher and assistant principal before he assumed the role of principal in 2011. Under his leadership, Meadow Creek was transformed it has transformed its culture, strengthened student, family, and community engagement, and increased the graduation rate by 22%. Significant. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Additionally, we have one panelist who you will see up on the screen. Michelle Gay is the co-founder and executive director of the Safe and Sound Schools. Following the tragic loss of her daughter, Josephine, in the Sandy Hook shooting, Michelle helped establish Safe and Sound Schools as a national resource for school safety. She conducts workshops and seminars presenting the Safe and Sound school safety model and resources. And she facilitates school safety development in communities across the country. We are pleased to share this video. It's a little longer than we thought. It's 6 minutes from Michelle, so get comfortable in your seat. Again, thank you for being here for this important conversation. It's time to turn the program over to Kelly Valancourt-Strobach from NASP and Greg Wapples, who is the NASSP Senior Manager for State Engagement and Outreach. Together, they will moderate today's panel after the video. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Gay. I've prepared a statement to share with you today that I hope will support your discussions about enhancing school climate and safety and provide some context for the work ahead. I'm the mother of 3 beautiful girls, one of whom I lost at Sandy Hook School on December 14th, 2012. She was one of 20 precious first graders and 6 beloved educators killed in a senseless attack on our school. In her honor, I work with another mother, Alyssa Parker, Emily's mom, to better prepare our nation's schools to prevent, respond to, and recover from school-based crises. I speak to you today not only as Josephine's mom, but as a former elementary public school teacher and now full-time school safety advocate. Our organization, Safe and Sound Schools, advocates for a comprehensive approach to school safety. Our national team of experts and school tragedy survivors knows well that there is no panacea, will never be a one-size-fits-all, a magic pill, cure, or single solution to school safety. There will be no single answer, no lock, program, or app that will solve safety. Instead, it will take dedicated focus in multiple areas and with strategic measures. It will be an ongoing process that involves parents, students, educators, teachers, law enforcement, emergency responders, mental health providers, and community members in a holistic approach to the safety and well-being of every child and every school community. It'll be a balanced approach that utilizes many solutions, many layers, as we like to call them, to ensure for our children the safest possible environment for learning and growth. A comprehensive approach to school safety balances the people, the place, and the plans and procedures to optimize the safety of the school community. The people, the students, educators, staff, and parents that comprise the school community are the foundation of a truly comprehensive school safety program. Their cultural, individual, and special needs must be considered in the design of any and all education, training, planning, and improvement. The place, the building and campus that houses this learning community requires continual attention, maintenance, and improvement to support the myriad and ever-changing safety challenges of today. From natural to human, physical to psychological, the design and equipment of the place must consider safety in a variety of circumstances and keep with the purpose of the place. The plans and procedures, predetermined and practiced, support all members of the school community in safety during times of crisis. They're inclusive of all school community members, and they are living documents designed to grow and change with evolving safety challenges and current best practices. In our view, comprehensive school safety encompasses 6 core mission areas, which I offer to you for consideration today. First, emergency management, the planning and training of multiple agencies, disciplines, and community groups with the community for crisis prevention, response, and recovery. Mental and behavioral health. Access to school-employed mental health professionals is imperative in order to provide adequate mental health education, support, and intervention when necessary. Further, our school-based mental health providers are essential in developing and managing school-based threat assessment and management programs to identify, address, and prevent harmful behavior. Increasing this access is essential to the safety of our schools. Physical safety and security, the environment, the design, the tools and technology that support life safety in balance with the primary function of the space to foster learning, growth, and positive social interaction. Communication, the common shared language, capability, and empowerment of all stakeholders in the community, and the tools, equipment, and procedures that facilitate both preventative and emergency communication. Culture and climate, the shared values, expectations, and spirit of the school community supported by programs that foster social emotional learning, character development, connectedness, and belonging. Community engagement. Families are an integral part of determining and upholding safety policies and practices. Meaningful involvement and proper education of parents and students establishes safety as a shared priority and sustains the continual improvement process. It's important that all plans and measures are developed with a local team that represents multiple disciplines and community perspectives in order to ensure that the changes and additions we make to our plans, procedures, buildings, and campuses are truly in keeping with the culture, the values, and the individuality of our unique communities. We also have to consider how changes are introduced and may affect the quality of the environment, the learning environment. In this day and age and in this great country, we have technology, talent, and creativity to design and improve our schools with safety and security enhancements and tools that do not compromise the warmth, climate, and ownership of these learning environments. Schools that plan for the safety of the place, with the people in mind, and with culturally and developmentally appropriate plans and procedures in place, are the schools we look to as models of school safety. Our students, parents, and educators deserve nothing less. Thanks for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. I encourage you to reach out to us at Safe and Sound Schools if there is anything more that we can offer to your discussion and the work ahead. Thank you very much.
So our first question, I'm going to start with Frank, so we would love for all of you guys to weigh in on this. In our current climate, when we hear the term school safety, generally people automatically think of school shootings or gun violence. And while high-profile school shootings like Parkland are tragic, and even one of them is completely unacceptable, these school shootings are actually statistically very rare. So if you could please discuss what you see, what you consider to be the most pressing school safety issues beyond school violence, beyond gun violence. So Frank, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Despite data showing a decline over a recent 10-year period, bullying, harassment, and discrimination continue to plague our nation's school today. Being a victim or a perpetrator of these behaviors does not in isolation lead to violence or suicide, but it certainly is a factor. We must work to make our school environments safe and supportive for all schools, especially those who are most vulnerable, including youth, LGBT, minorities, and special needs students. We also need to improve threat assessment practices, both in terms of self-harm and harm towards others. This action is especially important as the rates of suicide and non-suicidal self-injury continue to grow among our school-age youth over the last decade. Once identified at risk, these students must be connected with supports, resources that are clearly needed, and it's not enough any longer to just identify the threat. We must also manage it immediately, over the short-term and long-term intervals as well.
Michael, please share your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. And first of all, thank you to the National Association of School Psychologists and National Association of Secondary Schools for principals for the invitation today, and to Andrea Amador from Boston Public Schools, who works on this on a day-in, day-out basis, for extending the invitation as well. So delighted to be here, and as they said, I'm from Boston, so we do have translation services available. Melissa does work with us, so she's in UMass Boston, but she grew up in Arkansas, so she'll be better at translating. Anyway, so thank you for the invitation. And when I think of school safety, yes, we all think of school shootings, but I think well beyond that, because it is rare. And so as Frank mentioned, harassment and bullying is something that our students face every day. I also think of, as chair, I would often get a text from the superintendent, a call from the superintendent, there was a shooting near such and such school. We're in an urban district, and we have schools in a variety of neighborhoods. And I'd get texts during the day, such and such school's in safety mode, such and such school is in lockdown mode. And I'm a grown person who grew up in the city of Boston, so it's easy to say, oh, okay, fine, was anyone hurt, is everyone all set, fine. Now being an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old, and being lockdowns in safety modes a couple of times a month, right? What does this do to your psyche? And when I also think of school safety, I think of that. But I think of it collectively. We had a water issue in Boston, right? We had lead in our pipes. That's a safety issue. Food, trying to get better food for our students. So to me, it's everything that leads up to the classroom itself. How do we put our students in the best position to succeed? And it's transportation, it's having a clean building that provides good food, good water, their physical, their emotional health, all of those things that affect a student's safety to put them in a position to learn. So to me, it's everything up to the classroom.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting this as well. I would add to what Michael says, which is safety starts at just our basic Maslow needs, right? Our food, security, a place to sleep and rest and know that we have a safe place. And the psychological safety that kids come into school with makes a difference on their ability to learn. Because when you're sitting in a classroom and you're learning to read, you're learning to do math, you're learning new skills, it's a challenge. And it pushes kids to be uncomfortable. And sometimes when they're not feeling safe and not feeling their basic needs are met, their ability to move beyond, to do the learning tests that they need to do and manage those challenges becomes cumbersome. And so schools are serving multiple roles of providing basic needs for kids. And in that is a basic sense of safety to allow them to do the things that they need to do.
Good afternoon, and greetings from Georgia. We're a school outside of the Atlanta metro area. So we're a large school, so we have a lot of variables that impact a large school in an urban setting. I would say that one of the most important things is to make sure that the environment of the school is safe, but in order to do that, the climate has to be safe. Meaning that every student feels that when they walk through that door, they can operate as a student and remove those variables so that they can learn. So when you're in a local school, I really think that safety is important. Safety comes in many different forms that were mentioned prior to me speaking. And do you feel that you can be who you are in that space without being criticized? Are you able to operate on a day-to-day, going to 7 or 8 classes and feel that you can move freely in a safe space? There are a lot of different variables that go into that. So I believe in wraparound services. And every student comes with a different set of needs. Every family comes with a different set of needs. And truly, in order to create that safe space, they have to feel that they're valued and that their needs can be met. That's a huge burden on any school. So it takes a lot more than the educators in the room to get it done. It takes a lot of resources. It takes a collective effort among multiple associations to ensure that all students can be successful and get what they need so that they can focus on learning when they're in the building.
Hey folks, I'm Greg Waples with the National Association of Secondary School Principals. And Michael, I'd like to turn the next question back to you. Fostering a safe and supportive learning environment requires district and building level leadership, as well as collaboration among staff, parents, students, and the community itself. As a school board member, can you describe for us the types of district level policies that you've implemented to support school safety?
Sure, glad to, Greg. School safety, but also student psychological health is a really big deal to the Boston School Committee. And quite frankly, it's a big deal because it was brought to our attention. We've been taught by the psychologists in our district, the guidance counselors, the nurses, the social workers, about the important work that they do. And we're extraordinarily proud of the comprehensive behavioral health model that we have in Boston, which is a combination between UMass Boston and Melissa heads it there, and we'll talk about it in much more detail, and Children's Hospital. So it's 3 together working with our social emotional learning department. But quite frankly, at the school committee level, we're looking at it at a high level, and it was through the persistence of folks. It was meeting Andrea who runs it from the school district side, at a meeting in Boston on the street, and she introduced herself and started talking. I became very intrigued by this model that we have, because in times of limited dollars, how can we work proactively with our partners and really make a difference? And it was folks bringing it to our attention, particularly now around the conversation of school safety. So we're very proud of, we do not have guns in our schools. Our school police officers are not armed. We have 75 incredible school police officers, 55 patrol, 20 superior officers. They're supplemented by 17 full-time Boston police officers who work in our district. Those are armed, but our school police officers are not. In fact, they don't even have mace, and that became an issue. But they work hand in hand with our school leaders very proactively. And so when you talk about policies that we do, a couple of years ago we put in place a new code of conduct to focus on restorative justice. And why the heck were we suspending kids? Right? They're acting up in a school, so the solution is you're not going to be in school for a few days to fall farther behind. I mean, talk about the school to prison pipeline, right? So we put in place a new code of conduct with restorative justice, working with our psychologists, with an outside group of lawyers, psychologists, and others who drafted a policy for us that made sense. And we've been very proactive. And just from I've been in financial services for 25 years, so I tend to focus on numbers. In 2007, we arrested 464 students. In 2017, we arrested 132. That's a 251% decline. And this year we're on track. Last year we had 132, as I said. This year we're on track for 100, so another 30% decline. And our suspension rate is dropping as well. It's all about keeping the youth in the classrooms, being proactive about it, restorative justice, including improving the climate in the classroom itself. And that's the teachers. It's working with our psychologists and our guidance counselors and our nurses and our social workers to be proactive about this issue. And this is a matter of importance at the school committee level. So this year, in another year of tight budgets, we're really pleased that we got the mayor of Boston, Mayor Walsh, because we're a dependent district. Our funding comes predominantly from the city. He increased, even at the end, an additional several million so that we can go from 329 SEI professionals to 349. And so we actually spend 9 to 1, $9 on our proactive approach around SEI. As I said, the psychologists, the guidance counselors, the social workers, and nurses, compared to what we spend on our school safety officers. So pretty significant investment on our part.
Great, thank you very much. Frank, I know Miami-Dade County has been really active in proactive efforts to improve school safety. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those specific efforts that you've had down forth?
We've made a concerted effort to change the culture regarding the utilization of school mental health professionals, whether they be school counselors, school psychologists, or school social workers. For example, not using them in teaching academic courses, not having them on bus duty or cafeteria monitoring, or working with testing, proctoring. This is a gradual change. We're not there yet. They offer so many skill sets that can be utilized to assist students in violence prevention mode, as well as suicide prevention and other forms of prevention. Another initiative that we kicked off 3 years ago is called the Values Matter Miami campaign. And this particular model stresses the classroom instruction by school counselors to students on our district's 9 core values. And we're looking at respect, responsibility, integrity, honesty, fairness, kindness, pursuit of excellence, cooperation, and citizenship. This is an ongoing effort. We award students at school board meetings at the end of every month, and we have an end-of-year ceremony to recognize not only students, but staff and schools that excel in these areas. Also, would like to make mention of our relationship with the Sandy Hook Promise organization over the last 3 years. We have installed their Start with Hello program, which is a school connectivity program, making it much more likely for students together, as well as students and staff, to build trusting, positive, healthy relationships and reduce isolation as well. The See Something, Say Something program they offer has also been quite helpful in building the trust, once again, between students and staff to share information that is potentially dangerous, that affects safety on campus or off. And lastly, the safety assessment training. National leaders like Dr. Dewey Cornell and his associates have trained school safety assessment teams from around our district over the last 2 years. This is a major step forward for us, and now we do have these teams in place and look forward to working with them in developing appropriate policy and procedures that will hopefully meet the needs of all students who may be at risk or certainly are indicating that there may be a problem.
Great. If I could get Tommy in here real quick. Tommy, can you tell us a little bit about, at the building level, some of the efforts that you undergo as a principal to be proactive about school safety?
So at the local school level, I think you really want to be proactive in ensuring that you're meeting the needs of all students. In a lot of situations that occur, most likely occur because individuals don't know how to handle those situations when they occur. So preparation is important. We do a lot of work with our staff and our students on how do we engage with each other in a positive learning environment. How do you interact with each other to help each other through troubling times? And when it comes to safety issues that come from the outside, we do run drills frequently. Do you have stress tests for your organization to ensure that it's a safe and learning environment as much as possible? When emergencies happen, they are called emergencies for a reason. Statistically, they're anomaly. It's not expected that they occur. But have you planned for the unknown so that everyone is aware of what to do? One of the most important things, I think, though, is that when it comes to dealing with young adults, especially at the high school level, they're trying to discover who they are. So do you have a program in place to help them do that? So things like advisement are essential, where the students can have an adult in the building that they can talk to. It's important that every child in the building have an adult that they can go to. And then do you have the referral services that are necessary so that when a child is troubled, that the adults in the building know who that child can go to and have the appropriate services to help that individual. And that's vital to a student's success, but that's also being proactive in ensuring that all students are served, but also the adults as well. Another thing is, when you're dealing with discipline, PBIS, restorative justice, those things work. Is everything in your building a learning opportunity for students, or is there some things only punitive? People make mistakes in life. Do you have a system in place where they can learn from their mistakes, or they're only penalized and then set off to the side? So those are things that we do at the local school level to really help be proactive when it comes to things such as school violence or school safety.
Great, thank you, Tommy. And then one more follow-up question on this point, and I'll leave this up to Melissa and Michael. Boston Public Schools has been very proactive in increasing access to mental and behavioral health supports as part of the effort to improve schools. Can you briefly share why you believe that mental health supports can help improve school safety, and share a bit of your specific plan to increase access to school-employed mental health professionals in Boston Public Schools?
So I will try to briefly talk about 7 years of work of our partnership with Children's Hospital in UMass Boston. And the impetus for a lot of the partnership was there were overwhelming needs of kids, and our school psychologists and crisis teams were becoming involved. By the time they were involved in unpackaging what was going on, there was a long history of someone needing help, of someone needing support, and many times those supports weren't available when they needed them before it got to the point where it really hit a crisis. So the partnership revolved around how we keep children out of emergency rooms when they're having mental health crises. It involved keeping them out of discipline situations, and that is what drew all of our organizations together to create a partnership to support the schools. Because we had a research institution and a health service delivery system working together, we were very clear that if we were going to be a part of this project, we needed to more effectively know which kids needed supports and identify them early on before it got to the point where it was a crisis. And so one of our hallmark pieces of this has been having universal screening be a part of the way our schools operate. It allows us to identify kids that need more support and give those supports before it hits crisis level. One of the most interesting findings we've had, though, in this partnership is that the kids, we know the kids that end up in the principal's office. We know the kids that get mad and blow up. It's much harder to identify the kids that shut down and withdraw and cry and put their heads down. And this method that we have identified is effective at also identifying the kids that need a different kind of support. And those are the kids that we're finding the greatest impact for, the kids that frequently are overlooked. And so the outcomes that we're seeing are tremendous, and it gives us great hope as we look to the future of how this continues to support our students in Boston.
No, but Melissa has described exactly what's going on in the schools. I would strictly say from a policy viewpoint, we realize how important this work is. So we have approximately a $1.1 billion budget for 57,000 students. That's, if you do the math, it's about 20,000 per student, and that's huge, right? Compared to other cities and states, they drool over those figures. Yet we also spend about $110 million in transportation alone, just to bus students back and forth. And so it disappears pretty quickly when you start to do the math. And from the school committee viewpoint, we have great sensitivity to the fact that everything surrounding the student to put them in a position to learn is important. I mean, I graduated from the Boston Public Schools, and I did great in K through 6, and then went to one of our great schools and really struggled in high school. And, the approach then of suck it up and just study harder doesn't apply these days, because students have a lot of things going on outside the trauma that they face, neighborhood violence, domestic violence, chronic poverty. These are all issues that a lot of our students face day in and day out. And we try to work with other city departments on a coordinated basis, our superintendent does with the rest of the mayor's team. But once they become, from when they get on the bus in the morning to when they get home at night, they're ours. And our teachers do the best they can, but unless we address all those other things around it, positions are not going to be students are not going to be in a position to learn. We're not going to close the achievement gap, and we're not going to improve as a district.
Right, so we obviously know how important having access to mental and behavioral health services and school-employed mental and behavioral health professionals are in creating a safe and successful environment. But I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the role that effective discipline plays in creating a safe and successful environment. And Tommy, both you and Michael have touched on this a little bit. I just want to highlight the fact that most research indicates that zero tolerance policies and this over-reliance and inappropriate use of suspension and expulsion as a primary approach to discipline does not improve school safety. It can actually undermine a student's sense of well-being. It can undermine their sense of safety in a school, and really, learning is the reason why schools operate. And when we are doing things that undermine that environment, we are not creating a safe school. So I would love it, and this is something I would like for all of you to weigh in on. And Tommy, we'll go back, start with you. If you could describe some of the discipline strategies, positive discipline strategies that you use that you know are effective in creating a safe school. And Tommy, you mentioned that you use PBIS. If you could describe a little bit what that looks like. And Michael, if you could also elaborate a little bit more on the restorative justice practices that Boston Public Schools has been implementing.
So at our school, we decreased discipline by 52%. As you mentioned in the introduction, it was a turnaround strategy for the school, and it really started with creating a positive environment in the school. So PBIS is a program that provides positive reinforcement of the behavior that you expect. And that's typical classroom management strategies, but for some reason, it was never applied to a school as a whole. So some things that we do is we have three guiding principles for our students. We say collaborate, inspire, and know. Well, PBIS, they require and actually strongly suggest that you have some sort of motto or saying that can be applied to different spaces within your building. So to collaborate means that we work positively, we work with each other. Inspire means that we always inspire each other in everything that we do. Now, this is both for the students and the adults. And ownership means that we take ownership for the space that we're in. We have a sense of pride. And then what we do is we actually positively reinforce those behaviors throughout the week through tokens of appreciation. And what you've done is you kind of flip the paradigm of discipline, where you take more time focusing on the behaviors that are done correctly so that those behaviors repeat, and focusing on the negative behaviors. So what happens is the students begin to see where you spend your time. Research says, based on psychology, all students want to be recognized, shown attention, and appreciated. So I think what PBIS has done is to change that paradigm of, do you spend all of your time dealing with the problems, or do you spend all of your time dealing with the things that students are doing correctly? You highlight those things, more students want to be involved in that. So that's one thing that we did, but of course that's not going to create a 52% drop in discipline just by that. But it has to be built into the fabric of your organization. When you talk about adding resources, and typically what we do is we add another discipline assistant principal or a discipline dean, right? Well, you're not getting to the root cause of what's going on. So you take the time to add another counselor, school social worker, to address some of those issues that are bubbling up and becoming discipline issues. So we created structures in the school where we have kid talks. And those are the mechanism in which we identify students who are in need before they become discipline issues. So it provides teachers an opportunity, and counselors and school social workers, and psychologists, to sit down and talk about students who have these identifying areas that may become troubles. So we sit down and talk about the student, and then we refer them to a source in which they can receive the service. Now we have something unique where we built with partnerships where we actually have the Department of Health inside of our building. So that's called shared resources. So that provides an automatic outlet for a teacher or a student to refer a child to the service. But those are some of the variables that have led to a decrease in discipline, creating an environment that's really supportive of the students. And it changes the interaction. So now that they want to talk to you and they're not scared that because they disclose something to you, they may end up in trouble. They want to disclose something to you because they're asking for help. And we're all about teaching and learning. In order to learn, we have to be able to grow, and sometimes you have to be able to identify and disclose some information so we can grow from that. And that's where we are in our school. And those are some things that we do locally to decrease discipline.
Thank you. Michael?
So, you can do loads of things on a policy basis from a high level. You can have a new code of conduct that says we're going to focus on restorative justice. You can increase resources for school psychologists. You can do a number of things like that. But at the end of the day, it's what happens in the individual schools. So those of us who visit schools anytime or frequently know that in the first 5 minutes of walking around a school with the school leader, you get a pretty good feel of what's going to be happening in that school, of what the culture is like. And by the way, I can tell, I met Tommy earlier today for the first time. I already have a sense of what the culture is going to be like in his school. That there's quiet, firm discipline, students in a position to learn, teachers work collaboratively. You can just tell that from the school leader, right? That's the most important. They are the school leaders are the front lines. The old days of school leaders saying, it's my building, it's my way or the highway, is going to have Ms. Martell at the Joseph B. Manning and Dr. O'Leary at Boston Latin School. Those, not that I remember those, not that I was ever called to the principal's office, but those, not that I still have the emotional scars, but those, I will tell you, the first time I went as a school committee member to the headmaster's office at Boston Latin, it was a little different than walking in as a student there, I will tell you that. Anyway, the school leaders are the front lines, but the old days are gone. So it's the school leaders who work collaboratively with their teachers. We have a Mildred Ave K-8. We have two schools in the Mattapan section neighborhood. One of which we just closed because it was failing, and we're reopening it as started K-2 again, then adding grades back. Less than a mile away, the Mildred Ave K-8 just won School on the Move prize, and won a $100,000 prize from Ed Vestas in Boston. Why? Because that school leader sat down with their teachers and said, how are we going to have a collaborative approach to solving the problems of the school and dealing with the issues that our students face? And so work collaboratively as a team. And that school is fine. It's literally a school on the move. So it's the school leaders, to me, make such a difference. We can, from a policy viewpoint, improve a new code of conduct, but unless the school leaders buy into it and get their teachers buying into it and they work on it collectively, that's when you really see the differences. So, I'm very proud of the fact that the suspension rate over the last 3 years in Boston is down 31%. I was going to crow about that till I heard 50-something%. So we got a ways to go. Thank you, Tommy. We're going to be learning from you. But it's at school by school level. It's getting the buy-in, and it's people working collaboratively. It's not one school leader. It's not one school board member. It's everyone buying and rowing in the same direction that makes the difference.
And the part I want to add to that is, particularly when you're talking about high schools, having youth empowerment, youth voice being a part of the conversation is critical. We know that so many of the solutions that need to happen because the youth can see what the outcomes of it are. And I think that the youth voice has clearly been a part of our media discussions in the last few months after Parkland. But the youth are clearly impacted by all of what goes on, and once they hit high school, it's a wasted resource if we're not tapping into it. And we see it in the Boston School Committee, where the student council, one of the things that they created was an app for kids of their rights and responsibilities as students. So the students are sharing with others how to get access to the knowledge and supports to do what they need to.
Absolutely. I have the link to that Boston Student Advisory Council app called Know Your Rights. I have it on my phone, so if anyone wants it afterwards, I can share it with you. Because the students mention it to us all the time, and we love that they do.
Frank, I want to give you the opportunity to weigh in on this too.
Thank you. Contrary to popular thought, the reduction of exclusionary practices such as suspension does not make schools more dangerous. And as an alternative, a viable alternative to suspension, Miami-Dade County Public Schools has created what we refer to as the Success Program, where we have identified 10 success centers district-wide and hired nearly 50 school mental health professionals to serve as success coaches. This definitely flies in the face of what we had traditionally practiced. And it has led to obvious reduction in community-based suspension, which served nothing but to put unsupervised students on the streets of our community. So these programs that are generated to make the student experience success are out there in a very organized manner where they're receiving their complete academic programs, but they're also getting intensive behavioral and emotional support services by those school mental health professionals. And the ultimate goal is to return back to their homeschool environment as soon as possible. We've also instituted some of these success coaches at traditionally high volume suspension schools where they can work with the student, again, in their home environment prior to any type of exclusionary process ever kicking in. And we're seeing great results with that. The other point I wanted to make in regards to positive discipline strategies is that, yes, we want to teach expected behavior. We want our staff to model expected behavior, reinforce the appropriate behaviors through reward systems appropriately, and consistently also provide whatever consequences that are there in terms of our code of student conduct. However, I think we would all agree that if punitive types of consequences worked, our prison system would be empty and unneeded. That's not happening. So how do we use something more positive that not only deals with, yes, consequences and violations, but also builds children and adolescents to make them more successful?
I think one thing that we have heard so far is that it takes a team, that school safety efforts, there's not one single person that is responsible for it, there's not a single program or a single piece of equipment that you can buy that all of a sudden makes a safe school. You need school psychologists, you need school counselors, school social workers, school nurses, you need great school leaders. And certainly the school employed mental health professionals like the counselors, social workers, and psychologists play an important role in improving school climate and improving access to school mental and behavioral health services. So Melissa, you mentioned a little while ago the fantastic work, and those of you who came in early got a booklet about the comprehensive behavioral health model from Boston. We will send that out to all of you electronically so you can learn more about it, but I want to turn the floor over to you, and if you would please describe just briefly kind of what the comprehensive behavioral health model is in Boston, and really talk about how you guys have such a great sense of collaboration among the school employed mental health professionals and community providers. If you could just talk about how they collaborate to improve outcomes for students.
Well, so much of the foundation is having people that are a part of the school community, that work closely with teachers, that work closely with administrators, work closely with families, and that are part of the school context, that navigate those relationships and help support students in real time. But there's also times when the needs exceed what the school can do on an ongoing and daily basis, while they're also meeting all the academic needs of students. And so having that partnership is real critical. And one of the foundational pieces has been, there's a memorandum of understanding of what the partnerships look like with community partners. If they're in the building and there's someone having a mental health crisis, what are their responsibilities around helping secure the environment, around doing crisis assessments. There's also designated tasks around access to information, confidential information. We know that confidentiality is a fundamental piece of behavioral health services. But that collaboration requires that all the agencies come together and work with Andrea Amador, who Michael's mentioned, the head of psych services in Boston. Through that collaboration, it's also allowed for all of the schools to have partnerships. So when we started several years ago, we recognized that 25% of the schools had no community partners, and making that one of the target goals to make sure that each school had a partner that had access to support services. But also what those services look like varied. In one building, it could be a clinician that walks in and sees 3 kids and walks out. And others, it was a real partnership where the community partner was working with classroom teachers and other staff. And having the embedded relationships and partnerships is one of the critical pieces. But it happens best when you have someone who's a part of the school community, part of the team that can help refer out and make those connections for the kids needed the most.
To Tommy and Frank, I know you guys are also you have unique ways that you help meet the mental and behavioral health needs of the kids in your school. If you want to share a little bit about what that looks like, and if you have similar partnerships. I mean, Boston is a very unique model in that they have a university, school, hospital collaboration, but I know there's other different types of partnerships that are also effective in helping meet the needs of students.
Yes, in our school and in our district, we have, similar to what Melissa has mentioned in regards to community school practice, of bringing outside resources inside of the local schools to address the local school needs and forming MOUs or business partnerships of how the two would engage and whose role is what when certain situations occur. I think that that's very important to do, to kind of lay out the framework of understanding of how you will operate in that common space so that there's no confusion when something occurs or a student is in need. A lot of that helps out, and I'll bring it down to the local school level. But when you're dealing with students, there's a lot of information that gets shared, and it needs to go back and forth. And what I mean by that is if there's a student who's in need, who's having issues, let's say, with mental health care, if you don't have an MOU set up, the information may not flow from the therapist to the local school, and from the local school back to the therapist. And that information is vital so that both organizations understand what the student's needs are. You know, the student's needs just don't stop after therapy. And then when they go to school, they're fine. The teacher might need to know, maybe not about what the student's actual diagnosis is, but what are some strategies that can assist the student in the classroom? Or is there a therapist in the school that the child can go to if they're having a difficult day? Though that information, when you have the MOUs established, it really helps support the student in and out of the school. So the wraparound services help tremendously. Something that we have in our school is a teen center. It's called the teen centers because that's what the students named it. The students came together along with the Georgia Department of Health for both mental and physical care. You know, the access to these services, depending upon your financial situation, may not be there. So they created something called the Teen Center where students can go and kind of decompress, and it's kind of one of those what we call a safe room. Some of the students, you know, they go in there if they're having troubled days, they have compression chairs and things of that sort. But there's also a full-time therapist who's in there that can help the students with any of their needs. And that is the place where the student goes, if they don't know what to do, they can go there, and that individual will refer them to multiple resources. And they work strategically with students who may not have the resources to get either mental health care or the health care. So they have the resources that can help children and families who may not have the financial need or just don't know how to navigate it. I don't know about you, but I know that in my family we didn't talk a lot about mental health. So as a young child, they may not be exposed to that as well. So there are several conversations that we have with parents where they just don't know what to do. And they need to know that they can have a conversation inside the school and that we have the resources that can have those strategic conversations. Because as an educator, that's not what we're trained in. We're trained in teaching and learning, but that is a major variable. So I think it's essential to have those resources in the building. That's just an example of how we use wraparound resources to help our students in the building.
During the 2015-2016 school year, we lost 19 students to homicide in my district. All of those events occurred in the community, not on campus, but they impacted what went on campus and how students, teachers, peers were impacted. It was not a mass casualty event. They were all singular events, but I guarantee you the impact was just as intense as what occurred at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School for those families and friends and teachers as well. So in response to that, we rolled out 2 years ago a program we call Together for Children. This is a multi-agency approach, a community-wide approach to dealing with these issues that far too often have impacted the same communities within our district for many, many years. The mission is to leverage resources, experience, ideas, and create data-driven neighborhood action plans that are intended to prevent youth violence. The anchor institutions are the school district, local government, the Attorney General's office, as well as local district attorney, and the Children's Trust. What we have done is focused on 6 zip codes within the district where we find the highest incidence of youth violence and gun violence. We involve parents, service providers, leaders of the faith-based organizations, mental health agencies, law enforcement, parent groups, neighborhood housing projects, associations, and students as well in the planning process. We develop data-driven neighborhood plans based upon the input taken from all of these individuals and groups. And we address children and family needs at multi-level, the wraparound services such as you've heard of today. This also addresses recidivism rates, addresses early warning indicators within the school, such as attendance concerns, behavioral referrals, as well as academic failure. We build capacity and capability where it did not previously exist, and now we're looking at sustainability and funding that will take us well into the future.
One more comment on this topic. Thanks. I know there's a number of folks in the room who work on congressional staff, some of the committees, et cetera. And I just want to say something that you may not hear too often, particularly in light of the most recent budget, and that's thank you. We know there were a lot of cuts on the line. It seems like the districts are always coming to Congress and putting it with our hand out, right, and saying we need more money. More money will solve the problem. It's not just more money to solve it. More money helps. And we know how hard folks worked on this recent appropriation, saving Title II, increases to Title I. These were important things at our districts. And so I just want to say thank you for your work on that because it did make a difference. And quite frankly, we were really skeptical of whether it was going to happen. So we know the message was heard and the hard work was done in Congress to make that happen. So thank you. And know that in the districts, we're trying to come up with creative solutions how to spend money. So we talk about trying to get people to give their time, talent, or treasure. And the example that Melissa talked about, the comprehensive behavioral health model, is just that. It's Children's Hospital, it's UMass Boston, spending their own dollars, giving their doctors and their psychologists the help. It's the educators from UMass Boston giving their time, talent, and treasure. So we're trying to come up with innovative things at the district level. We're not always coming to Congress with our hands out. So, but I just want to stop for a moment and say thank you because we know how hard folks worked on this last appropriation.
I want to add one more piece to that.
Absolutely.
In all the data that we collect in our project, one of the things that we look at is how people are spending their time. And we have school personnel, school psychologists, school social workers, school nurses, doing this work, and we've been looking at the schools where they're putting in more time for prevention, and we're finding that as the year goes on, the more they spend time on prevention, the less time they're spending on crisis. And so we're seeing the resources be used in a way that's more effective and more beneficial to so many kids. And again, it's that being creative with how we use the resources. So my graduate students get now to be trained in some of the most effective and advanced models of service delivery while they're pre-service, and it prepares them to continue on and go and do the work in a preventative way.
Great. I'd like to follow up on another point that Frank raised, talking about early warning indicators. And Tommy, I'd like to turn this to you. As a principal, you spend a good portion of your day interacting with students, and the teachers in your building spend most of their days directly interacting with students. How can we see warning signs with students that may be undergoing a crisis or may be prone to commit violence to themselves or others? What are those warning signs, and how do you handle it in your building in terms of trying to identify those before something happens?
So one important thing, as I mentioned it before, is that the students have to have an adult that they can talk to, but you have to strategically build that framework inside your school building. So I mentioned something before called our Kid Talk Time. And the Kid Talk Time helps our teachers identify some of those early warning things that might maybe not directly align, but lead to some concerns with the students. So we have something called an ABC report: attendance, behavior, and then curriculum. Well, those are indicators that determine whether or not a student may be at risk to drop out. But those are also indicators that can highlight whether or not a student might be in need. So as we begin to analyze absentee rate, we start to really look at why. Why is a student absent? We begin to highlight a lot of other things that may be impacting the student. We talk about student engagement inventory surveys. We do those twice a year for our students. There's questions that really help the students communicate whether or not they're engaged in their learning environment. And it goes beyond science, math, social studies, and science. It goes to things such as, do you feel safe in your school? Do you feel as if you have someone you can talk to? Do you feel as if you have friends in your school? If someone is being bullied, do you feel as if you can go tell someone? So they ask a variety of questions. And we take that data and we begin to move forward and we act. But also, that mechanism allows for a student to receive immediate referrals for assistance. So our social workers, we actually have school social workers, I have 2 of them inside of my local school. Now remember, that was a decision. We either make a decision to hire a dean of discipline, or we make a decision to hire a school social worker. Right? So we have our social workers as well as we have our counselors involved in that conversation, so that they're able either one to provide information, or they're able now to put them on their list of support so that they can do that. Another thing that we do to help us as we begin to identify our students is we actually have school psychologists that come to our school. And we have psychologists that come from outside organizations, whether it be the hospital or another organization, and they sit down and provide direct service inside of the building for the students. Now, our parents sign off on it, but they know that they don't have to drive their child to the therapist now, that the child can come during lunch and receive therapy. So those are some things that we do, but I think collectively as a school, you have to make it a priority to know your students. And then when you know your students, you have the resources either at your fingertips or inside of the building so that you can refer your students to those areas. So those 3 things that I mentioned, collaborate, inspire, and own, when we talk about collaboration, that means we collaborate as individuals, and if any one of us needs support or help, we help each other get there, whether it's an adult or a child. So some of our referrals, I mentioned that we have mechanisms for our employees, but referrals come from students as well. So students, through their organizations, students who are in need, who need support, that teen center that I talked about, they call it a teen center because it's kind of like, a place where they can feel cool. But they come there and they talk about their student issues, topics that are going on in the school. And I'll share with you all a quick story. When I first became principal, there were 2 students who committed suicide. On the night of prom, there was a student who died in a vehicular homicide that was being driven by one of our students. 2 other students were injured in that car accident. One of them had some brain damage as a result of it, and the other one, she did okay. And that was my first year as principal. Remember, this was a turnaround model, so there were a lot of other variables going on. But that happening made me realize that there's something that needs to be addressed, and it was the culture of the school. So addressing the culture of the school, you have to address all of the variables so that the students have outlets in which they can talk about positive behavior, how they should behave on and off campus, the community as a whole, how those things come into play. And we've seen their behavior, how they conduct themselves in the building, but it also has changed their lives out of the building. Because when you have those resources, I believe, where students can communicate their thoughts and things that they're going through, it teaches them best practice behaviors of how to handle difficult situations, from the very minor situation of having a problem with my boyfriend or girlfriend to my mom just died and I don't know how to handle it situation. So I think that those things are important for a child's development when they're an adolescent individual. But that's a lesson that I learned early. So that's the reason why we provide those services, and I really have an environment that I feel can support the whole child.
Thank you, Tommy, so much for sharing that personal story as well. That was incredibly impactful. I'll just open this up to the rest of the panel. And your work, how are your schools and districts helping to ensure that staff have the skills that they need to recognize those same type of warning signs in students?
So I'd like to mention, I want to reinforce Tommy, with something that Tommy just said, which is, it's not just a teacher, it's not just a student. I'm fond of saying it's actually a three-legged stool for a student to succeed. The student has to work at it, the teacher has to work at it, but there has to be another caring adult in the student's life. And it can be a parent, it can be another relative. Many of our students don't have a caring adult in their life, unfortunately. And so it's up to the district, it's up to the school, it's up to the teacher to figure it out and try to figure out those students and try to figure out how to get supports for them. There were a couple of other student populations that you always have to be thinking about. Our English language learning students. So they have language difficulties that often don't translate for some of these concerns that we're talking about. Our students with disabilities, particularly those in substantially separate. And let's not forget how often we are putting young men of color in substantially separate classroom under the emotional guise, right? The old check off the box type thing, which is horrendous when you look at the statistics. Our undocumented students, we haven't talked about them at all today. And yet, talk about trauma and talk about fear. We have students that are afraid to come to school because they're afraid that when they come home from school, their parents aren't going to be there. Or that we're going to come into school buildings to get them. These are real concerns in a lot of our neighborhoods. Homeless students, we have 4,000 homeless students in Boston Public Schools. Many of whom the state is placing in temporary housing outside the city, but we still have to bus them back into the city. They can be facing 2-hour bus rides to come to school. And, I saw a study recently that a lot of the characteristics of ADHD are the same characteristics that students with homeless suffer. Inability to attention, non-social behavior, so on and so forth. Teachers often misdiagnose that. They don't realize that their students can be homeless. Students with formally interrupted education that have come to us from other countries that, my wife grew up in a civil war in Beirut and moved to the U.S. in the middle of it. She still has stories to this day of what she faced, and we have a lot of students who face that as well, coming from some African countries, etc. So these are all subsets of populations that we have to think about their emotional health as well. And our superintendent is fond of telling the story, Dr. Chang, when he first day of first grade in LA Unified School District as a first grade student, having a teacher screaming at him because he only spoke Taiwanese. And so these get seared into your memory and you think about having supports, but I want to mention we have the Becoming a Man program for our students, trying to provide that mentorship. But one of the best programs I've actually heard about recently is in Miami-Dade, Representative Wilson's program. What is the 5,000 role models? 5,000 role models. Love that program. That should be in every major city across the country.
You just took one of my points.
And we didn't even know that, but and for folks who don't know it, and Representative Wilson started it, she's a former teacher and school leader herself, and it's a phenomenal program.
Well, Frank, do you care to elaborate on the program?
That is just certainly one of many programs that we have available as a mentorship program involving members of the community working with children throughout their educational careers, and it's been a very positive, ongoing program. Also, several other ones I quickly want to highlight. Typical or Trouble, a program, a design that was put together, created by the American Psychiatric Foundation. It's a 1-hour faculty school staff presentation that acquaints them with understanding and having awareness of differences between typical teenage behavior and what may cross the line into troubling concerns or potential mental illness. We're not teaching them to become diagnosticians. We want them to be more familiar with what they're seeing and hearing in the classroom, being that they are there 5 days a week, 7 hours a day at least, and see and hear many things. They take action. They show certainly their concern to the student, have empathy, and then make sure that that child is handed over to someone on campus, typically the school mental health professional, to follow through with family and make the right connections for outside services should they be warranted. We also have the youth mental health first aid course that's being taught throughout our community. Our employees have opportunities to sign up for that course. It's more in depth, it's a full day, and gets more down into detail. and suicide prevention. We put together a webinar for all of our school employees to view each and every year with supportive resources to know what to look for in terms of risk factors, what the protective factors are, and what you can do as a classroom teacher to respond to these types of risks once they make themselves present.
But to say, in our partnership, one of the things that Children's Hospital has done is created online training modules for teachers, so that it's called the TAP program, and it gives teachers basic understanding of social emotional development and what to look for in the classroom and how to support kids as they're developing coping skills and empathy as they're engaging in their classes and in their classrooms.
All right, so we're running short on time, so I'm going to combine, Frank, just so you know, I'm going to combine one question, or two questions into one, so keep you on your toes. We talked a lot about the prevention aspect and how we can create safe and supportive school environments, but unfortunately there are going to be instances where schools do experience a crisis. So Frank, given your experience as being a lead crisis responder in Miami-Dade County, can you describe the work of your team and how that aligns to ongoing school safety efforts? And wrapped into that, also talk about how schools can best prepare for a crisis, and if there are certain aspects. We've talked a lot about just comprehensive school safety in general today. Are there certain components or certain aspects of school safety that naturally help schools be prepared for a crisis if it does happen? That's a lot to answer in one question.
Our response is yes. Clearly, there's more to school safety than just prevention. We do have a comprehensive approach from a team level at the district in dealing with crisis management that focuses on prevention of, preparation for, response to, and recovery from personal crises, critical incidents, and disasters. There's a lot of professional development and technical assistance that's going on to get out there, provide mental health awareness, suicide prevention, suicide risk assessment and intervention, as well as postvention following suicides. Training that also deals with threat assessment and intervention and grief-related support services. We network with the district school mental health professionals in the delivery of a continuum of post-crisis services, including the immediate, short-term, and long-term approach through psychological first aid, psychoeducation, classroom and small group, crisis intervention, as well as bereavement support. And I also want to comment on the collaboration here. It's very important that school employees, mental health professionals, and relevant community agencies combine resources in some of these situations because of the magnitude of these events. Case management is also critical. We never want to let an at-risk child fall off our radar screen, which we hear, unfortunately, accounts of on the evening news. As far as the actual preparation for crisis, the old adage in crisis management is that a failure to prepare is preparing to fail. We need to be at a greater state of readiness, develop policies and procedures that take an approach of a multi-phase, multi-hazard, multi-agency, and multi-tier approaches to crisis management. Extensive training for administrators, school crisis teams, faculty, school mental health that highlights their expertise and their functions within a school critical incident response team. Planning to address the needs of caregivers. We don't look at that a lot. If you ever attend a training on crisis management, it's always the last piece in the last 10 minutes of the training. We need to care for the people that care for others. And that needs to be not just in the immediacy following a crisis, but for long term. Provide long-term support measures and resources. We know after major crises, and again, my experience at Parkland, that about half the students who had intense exposure to the situation that occurred will develop post-traumatic stress disorder, and about half of them will still have troubling symptoms almost 3 years out. So looking at long-term support services, we need improved community-based mental health resources for referrals and developing evaluation components to capture lessons learned, and there always are lessons learned. As far as large district approaches and how they differ in preparation, we really need to have district-level crisis management and school safety staff that lead the way. A sizable network of trained school mental health professionals need to be mobilized in a quick and efficient manner, as well as plans to address single and mass casualty events, which really will involve the creation of collaborative efforts between other school districts and whatever services they may be able to offer. For example, at Marjorie Stone and Douglas, they involved up to a dozen other school districts around the state who rotated school mental health professionals through the school site. And to this day, they're still seeing about 100 students a day. So there is a lot to be done. Adhering to the incident command structure, planning, operations, logistics, finance, as well as dealing with the culturally responsible and understanding the students and families that you serve. You have to have cultural sensitivity, linguistic sensitivity, and meet the needs of all.
Great, thank you. So before we open it up to questions, we are on the Hill. We are here to talk about how we think Congress can help us do this. And although Michael said thank you for the funding bill that just went through recently that did provide a lot of funds to help support this work on the ground, I'm here to say please do it again. There are, Title I, Title II, Title IV are, three of the big flexible grant programs that provided a significant amount of money for states and districts to do this work. And certainly, I think as everyone mentioned, it's not the sole responsibility of Congress to help do this work. Their responsibilities are at the state and local level, but there are significant investments that Congress can help make. So I will keep it short, but again, implore you to do the same thing that you just did in the FY18 appropriations bill, explicitly around, Title IV-A can be used to provide these services to implement restorative justice and mental and behavioral health and positive discipline and all of the things that everyone up here has talked about doing. And 1.1 billion was a fantastic start. And again, with Title II, the importance of having high-quality professional development for educators to actually carry out this work. So, while I will echo the thanks for doing it this past year, 1 year is really not enough. This needs to be sustained, ongoing funding so that districts can really make some adequate long-term investments in this work. And so with that, turn it over to Greg. He has some other things we would like you to do, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Just to make one final point, as we discuss school safety after Parkland, Newtown, and so many other school shootings, we can't ignore the deadly and devastating impact that gun violence has on many schools and our communities. Our organization strongly urged Congress to seriously address loopholes in current law that allow dangerous individuals to easily purchase high-powered firearms. Coupled with the other policies that we've discussed here today, enacting common sense legislation to keep guns out of the wrong hands will help keep our schools, educators, and communities and students safe. Thank you very much.
All right, so we have some time. If you guys have questions, would open the floor to you guys. We do have, since we are doing this online, if you could be loud, because we can't really throw the microphone out there to you. We do have a couple of questions from folks online that want to give you guys. Yeah.
When I think about student safety, I also think about the video, for instance, from North Carolina, when a school resource officer pulled a student out of their desk pretty aggressively. And so in school districts where you are utilizing school resource officers, here in Boston, they're unarmed, what are you doing to protect students from school resource officers as well, given the brutality issues we're facing in our society today?
It's fascinating you say that, and think about the key words that you actually have to say, which is how do you protect students from school resource officers? And I know you have to say that, but think about that sentence, right? If you're at the point we actually protect students from the officers who were sworn to protect them, wow, that's pretty wild. We're really proud of our Boston School police officers. They are hands-on in the school, know a lot of the students. Yes, there's a lot of thought process about should school resource officers be involved in discipline, or should that be the administrators? And I know NASP has serious thoughts about that. In Boston, our officers, and again, we recently voted, the school committee voted a resolution, no guns in schools. We're totally against that. And quite frankly, the thought of, and I understand we're a very big country and we're rural and suburban and urban, and some rural districts may feel differently, but in all the urban districts that I deal with through the Council of Great City Schools, we have no interest in it. We say loud and clear, guns don't have a place in our schools. And our school police officers have not asked for it. They did ask to be armed with pepper spray, in the event of breaking up big fights, that type of thing. And after a long discussion, we decided against it. The superintendent recommended against it, the school committee went along with it. And we haven't seen this as an issue. Our school officers are actually really good. And they have a great collaboration with the Boston Police, who have 17 full-time patrol and detectives assigned to the schools. And they handle some of the most serious issues. But, you know, for example, they think through loud and clear now. Yes, I gave the arrest figures, which are way down. But they're also very clear on what happens if a student is arrested and what that triggers these days, in particular for our undocumented students. So they're proactively looking for how do they de-escalate a situation as much as possible. And, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had a major issue. I cringe when I see videos like that. I quite frankly would be very, very surprised if something like that happened in the Boston Public Schools with one of our school police officers, because they just take a different approach. Their training is different. They work so collaboratively with our schools, with our school leaders. That's where it starts from. I hope that answers your question.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I will, because I deal hand in hand with them as SROs, and I think it's important the training that they receive. You know, when you hire them on, our SROs they're trained in the framework of their first responsibility as a role model. And they have 3 primary responsibilities inside of the school building. And the first one is being a mentor, second one is being a teacher, and the last is law enforcement. And they operate in that framework. They're hands-on with the students, but more on a mentor standpoint, more providing and being a resource of information if the students need that. And that has worked out very well for us. I don't know if you ever grew up in a time of day where, you know, your local police officer was your pal, and they helped you out when it came to T-ball and all those other things. They might have been your coach. Well, that's the model that we have within our school district. So our SROs are seen first as mentors and as teachers, and then last as law enforcement agents. And it's really helped with the relationship between students and the SROs, but also the SRO relationship with that of an educator, because of some of the variables that Michael mentioned, we're well aware of, and we want to make sure that we work to make sure we're doing the best thing in the interest of the students first as they're under our care.
I also wanted to add that in our district, and the system is far from perfect, but our school resource officers do receive 40-hour intensive training in crisis intervention. That's given by a mental health professional to assist them in de-escalating students that are escalating or already have, and trying to diffuse situations that could become dangerous. We also know that those days of officer friendly are certainly not what we're hearing and seeing nationally in the media, but there is certainly a lot of value to officers that do get involved at a prevention level and a relationship level. In so many of our urban centers, law enforcement is not necessarily seen in a very positive light, and that's unfortunate in that most are doing the right thing and trying to reach out and help, but are tarnished by some episodes that we all are far too aware of. So working together as a community, as a school district, in trying to push the agenda of school safety from a prevention perspective, rather than just a punitive law enforcement type of perception, is an ongoing effort.
So I'm curious how national policy or guidance specifically impacts each of your schools or school districts. Specifically, I'm talking about the Obama-era school discipline guidance, where you're trying to reduce suspensions and expulsions, and then we have the administration that says in lieu of that guidance. How did that change sort of the things you've already established to reduce suspensions and to reduce expulsions?
Yes, I'll start with that. Everyone looked at me. You know, I would say most importantly, you know, policy from a local school level, policy is very important because it creates behaviors. Because when policy changes, you have to change how you behave. So I think that the initial response was, you know, we want to reduce suspensions. Well, I think that it goes a lot deeper than that. It goes to, we want to reduce the behavior or how we interact with the behavior that creates the suspensions. So the byproduct of that is that that's what has occurred.
So it's fascinating, right? The federal government sets a lot of regulations from various departments, and then you can also have the bully pulpit of Washington and our national leaders. And this is going to sound really terrible. I'm trying to think how to phrase it the right way, so I'm going to give you 3 examples. One is work about ELL that the Justice Department really focused in on and held a number of districts, including Boston, in contempt of not treating our students right and holding our feet to the fire to improve our services for ELL. And we had a consent decree with the Justice Department on that issue. And we're now actually really proud of the work that we have done. We think we've become one of the national leaders in working with our ELL students. That was brought about because of a consent decree. Right, so we were pushed on that. The suspension issue, tracking that from the education department, we're really proud of what we've done, and we're actually seeing, yes, we all complain about folks in Washington putting regulations on us, but sometimes they actually make sense. I hate to say that, but suspension rates down 31%, and improving issues for our students in safe schools, yeah, it makes sense. President Obama was on the bully pulpit about get rid of redundant testing, really focusing on just having the right amount of testing. And we took that seriously. We went back at Boston and started really looking at all the tests that we do and do we really need it. And, we had a school committee meeting last week and they presented the NAEP results, and Boston does fantastic on it, but then I asked the superintendent, that's great, but what do we learn from it? What are we changing academically because of our findings from this? Because otherwise it's just a chance for us to beat our chests, and we can do that enough as Patriots fans and Red Sox fans. We don't need to talk the NAEP results, right? So I wanted to see, are we actually learning something from those tests? Otherwise, why are we subjecting our students to it? So in some cases, in each of those 3, do we have the Justice Department breathing down our neck now about ELL? No, but we're going to keep doing the practices because it's the right thing for the students. Do we have education breathing down our neck on suspensions? No, but we're going to keep going the code of conduct because we believe it's right. Do we have folks breathing down our neck about unnecessary or redundant testing? Yeah, parents and teachers bring it up a lot. And we're still doing a serious look at what do we learn from it, and is it right, and if not, let's get rid of it. So the messages change all the time. I hope that's answering your question, that and yet there can be other things proposed that we fight tooth and nail on because we think it doesn't make sense. And so that's a different conversation. But I think these are some examples where, as much as it cost a lot of work and a lot of pain on our end, I think it was right for the students. At the end of the day, it always has to be about the students. What's right for our students, what puts them in the best position to succeed.
Thank you.
Julie Clark with the National Association for College and Christian Counseling. Thank you all for being here today. My question is actually also in regards to the 2014 guidance that sort of highlighted the racial disparities in school discipline. And there has been a lot of conversation from members of Congress and others suggesting that this guidance be rolled back. Is there any data that shows that the guidance has actually made schools less safe? And just sort of generally, how would you respond to folks who suggest rolling back the guidance, sort of particularly in light of Parkland?
Besides using the word asinine?
I'm trying to come up with another word that I can use. So.
Just speaking as one district, we don't shy away from accountability. We don't shy away from people holding up the mirror and pointing out hard facts. You know, I mentioned before the disparity in the rate of young men of color who are assigned to substantially separate, or picked out as students with disabilities and substantially separate, particularly under the emotional guys because they can't think of anything else. We need to hear that. You can't, if you run from data, you're in the wrong business. And you have to be willing to look at it and look at the lessons learned and do something about it. I mean, I have in front of me our suspension rates, and I have it broken down by Black and Latino and white and Asian, because you have to look at it. And by the way, you also have to look at socioeconomic data. You have to look by neighborhood. There's a whole range of statistics, not just by someone's skin color. Right? And you have to look at it and learn and think about what the impact is. You know, President Kennedy said a rising tide lifts all boats. Right? We have to improve the performance of all of our students, and the district overall is going to improve. So.
I want to piggyback and say that when we started the partnership with Boston, one of the things that we were looking at was the number of office discipline referrals, because that's typically what's used to identify kids needed support services. And they were clearly over-identifying boys, particularly African-American boys, and those that were acting out. And so the commitment that we made to using universal screening was to help balance that, because we knew that there were other kids that had needs that were withdrawn and shut down, and girls that were quiet that were having other expressions of their distress. And that's one of the reasons why we've been so excited about the outcomes that we're seeing, that it's the internalizing kids that are making the greatest gains. So finding alternative ways that are more socially just is one of the commitments that has been a part of our project and our partnership.
I'll be very quick, but we talked a lot about early indicators, and reviewing the data can provide indication that there may be something that needs addressed within a district, a school, a county. But the discipline, and looking at the discipline broken down by who's receiving the discipline, can be an early indication of something else that goes on. So without reviewing that data and bringing that to the front of your lobe, thought lobe, I don't see how you could really ensure that you're educating all students at high levels. You want to make sure that you are providing a safe and secure environment for students at all levels, and there may be information within the data that may provide that maybe there needs to be more support mechanisms in place, and maybe there needs to be some training that may be in place for those who are issuing the discipline. But I believe that those are great early indicators. Sometimes might be lagging data, but it's still an indicator that something may need to be addressed.
And I saw we have one more in the room question, and we're going to try to get to someone online. But I saw your hand up.
I'm just wondering, based on some of you guys' research, if you had found that there are specific classroom needs that maybe, for example, students that have learning disabilities who are frustrated with those disabilities, they have the resources in the classroom to get their help for those learning disabilities, so they don't act out from that.
That is one of the things is that we know that learning academic curriculum can really challenge some kids, and if they don't have the coping mechanisms to go with it, it can exacerbate their learning experiences. That's one of the reasons why when we've, in this partnership, been looking at all the pieces of data, is also looking at the academic outcomes. And we're finding that when we're teaching kids coping skills and how to manage their frustration and stress, we're also finding concomitant academic gains for kids. So we're seeing that in reverse of what your question was, which is if we support kids in their emotional development, can we also see them make gains academically? Knowing that some kids are going to struggle in different kinds of ways and need additional support services, and have those available as well.
And I think part of that is well looking at not only children with learning disabilities, but those that have behavioral or emotional concerns, and changing the conversation from what's wrong with this child to what happened to this child. And looking at creating trauma-informed schools and trauma-informed classroom settings where teachers are specifically trained on how to address the needs that arise. We don't often take a look at why they do what they do. There's a reason or reasons. If we can track it back and connect the dots, we typically can find what's leading to the current concern. And then trying to remedy that situation, help that child by seeking in the necessary supports.
I'll simply say that in Boston, we passed a policy to try to increase inclusion versus substantially separate. But we've had teachers, and one I listened to quite well, who was a Massachusetts Teacher of the Year, and she teaches in a full inclusion classroom, and she said, you know, you don't make it a full inclusion classroom just by saying you're full inclusion. Right? You have to be very careful and thoughtful how you do it. And it's not just in the classroom, but it's the school itself that has to understand the difference, and having the right para support, et cetera, in the classroom. And having them used to working in a collaborative way, and getting the students ready for it too, and getting the parents understanding of what inclusion means. When we first voted to increase inclusive opportunities, we had parents come to us and say, I don't want my child in an inclusive classroom. I want my child in a academically pushing. Like, whoa, you know, let's hear from the parents who have been in inclusive classrooms and sing the praises of it. So you have to be very thoughtful in how you do it, and having the supports that I think that's you were getting at with the question.
All right, so we are going with one more question, which I actually think is a pretty perfect question to end on, because I'm sure it's something that a lot of people run into. So for all of you, and again, because we're a little bit over, I'm going to ask you to be brief with your response, but we have a question from online, and it is, how do school leaders deal with initial resistance from educators or other stakeholders when trying to implement a more comprehensive approach to school safety? So with that, Tommy, we'll just start with you and come down the line.
Well, I've received a lot of resistance when it comes to the whole student approach, but for those that may not understand the whole student approach, I think they can never argue with dealing or doing what's right for the students, and understand that all students aren't the same and they come with a variety of different needs. So therefore, in order to provide the services, we really need to address the whole child in order for them to be effective in the classroom. And that's how we've addressed it.
When we started our project, one of the things we were concerned about was resistance, not just from leaders, but from classroom teachers. And I think one of the big surprises was how aware the teachers were of the needs of kids and how helpless they felt in wanting to know how to help students. And I think it was a lot of the groundswell from the teachers that helped the buy-in happen from leaders, because the teachers wanted the students to do better, and they knew that just sending them down to the principal's office was not going to be the solution to helping the kids function better or their classrooms function better.
And I would add to that, it takes the leadership to buy in and focus on collaborative. So our superintendent, Dr. Tommy Chang, is totally bought into social emotional health and learning. He hired the first deputy superintendent for social emotional learning in a large district in the country, and made that a deputy superintendent position. We have a great relationship with the Boston Teachers Union. And so, yes, there some initial resistance from some folks, probably, but you know, the president of the Teachers Union now, Jessica Tang, is totally on board with social emotional learning and working collaboratively together. So are our students, and so student and parent voice is critical as well. And having the leadership of those groups, the Boston Student Advisory Council we mentioned before, have you know your rights, work with us in code of conduct. So having buy-in from each of those groups and having a collaborative effort instead of just an edict from central office makes a huge difference.
Regarding the buy-in that Michael and Melissa spoke of, I also think it's important for folks out at school sites to really see that we're making a concerted effort toward being more proactive than reactive. If we look at school board policies around this country, the majority of them have been born out of tragedy or litigation, not forethought about what we need. We need to examine again what works, and if we can show success and where it's worked in other areas, other districts around the nation, they're much more likely to buy into it and give it a go.
Right, well, we are 8 minutes past how long we said we would keep you, so thank you all for sticking around, and thank you all for coming today, including those of you that joined us online. If you have specific questions for our panelists, I think they have a few minutes. You can come up and talk with them directly. If we don't already have your contact information, if you didn't RSVP, but want to get some follow-up resources, Christina will be standing at the door back there. If you just want to give her your business card, we'll make sure it's into additional resources. So again, thank you guys for coming in and enjoy the rest of the day.